And now we are going to make one of the best, most iconic dishes of summer, at least in my opinion, but it uses tomatoes from your garden as well as basil from your garden or from the store. And we're going to make caprese, which is an Italian dish, very easy. It's basically an appetizer, but everybody loves it. So I got 2 different heirloom tomatoes to use. And heirloom is supposed to mean that the seeds have been around for at least 50 years, which is not a super long time. But sometimes, though, heirloom tomatoes can be tricky to grow because the older varieties fell prey to some sort of blight or infestation, or they're vulnerable to a certain kind of insect. So I like heirlooms, but I also would not ignore hybrids, modern hybrids, which are a blend of the heirloom and more modern disease-resistant varieties of tomatoes. So I would just say, yes, heirlooms are great. You don't necessarily always have to have an heirloom. And if you're trying to grow them in your home garden, it may actually be more difficult to grow an heirloom than a modern hybrid because heirlooms were not optimized to make it easy to grow at home. So just a word to the wise, if you want to grow your own tomatoes, don't discard, take a good look at all the labels and don't discard the non-heirloom varieties. They might actually work better in your garden. So that's one of the elements of this dish. And then of course basil, which this is the biggest basil leaf I've ever seen. They do not normally get this big, but yay. So normally you're talking more like, now I found these at the market. I do grow them in my own garden, but I have actually not planted my garden yet. I'm doing that this weekend. So these are kind of huge, huge leaves. Normally you see leaves that are maybe, I don't know, half of that, if. But basil is prolificate if you start it in your garden, you know, by early June-ish. You know, if you start a seedling that already has decent leafage on it, you will get a nice crop of basil. And if you do grow basil in your garden, one thing you want to really keep an eye on, I do not have an example here to show you, but you'll see that they start to go to flower. And it's called bolting. When plants do that, when they start to produce seeds, it's called bolting. You do not want them to bolt because if they do that, then the plant will put all its energy into actually producing seeds rather than leaves. And if it's a plant where you want to eat the leaves like basil, you do not want it to go to seed. And so if you grow basil and you do see those little flowers start to form, you want to pinch them off. You want to do that right away because by pinching off those flowers, then it'll keep producing a bushier, more leafy plant, and that's what you want. So that's a tip if you're going to garden your basil. The other element here, it's kind of a 3 main ingredient dish. The other element here is mozzarella cheese. In this case, I found the genuine Italian style mozzarella di bufala, which is buffalo milk mozzarella. So it tastes much more creamy than the kind of insipid version domestically made. So I do like to get it when I can find it. It's a richer flavor, a little bit more earthy, it has more depth to it. So if you do happen to find the mozzarella di bufala, which is a buffalo, definitely choose that. You're going to be very happy with the result. So when you are cutting your heirloom tomatoes or any tomato, you need a very sharp knife. You preferably need a nicely ripe tomato. And you just want to make some nice slices because we're going to put this on a platter. So you're not trying to make things necessarily bite-sized. This is kind of a showy dish. And people kind of just get to fend for themselves in terms of eating it. You're not trying to make it super bite-sized-y. So you can go ahead. I do cut out if there is kind of a harder piece in the middle of the tomato. And you'll see as you're cutting it, if you hit a piece that seems kind of woodsy, then you can go ahead and cut that out. Otherwise, if it seems like you don't have woodsy pieces to it, that's great. You can just keep on slicing thinly. But you do want to cut out the stem, of course. You don't want to include that. You can kind of cut around it. And I like to get different colors of tomatoes when I make this dish, just because I think it adds a lot of visual appeal. So that's why I got one yellow and one red. But I mean, tomatoes come in all kinds. You know, green zebra tomatoes are green when they're ripe. There's ones that are such a dark purple they almost look black. There's ones that are striped and speckled and spotted, all kinds of colors. So you can do whatever you like in terms of the color of your tomato. So as soon as you cut your tomato, you can go ahead and arrange it on a platter. And the size of your platter is basically going to determine how many tomatoes you need. So I'll actually put it more in front so you can see better what I'm doing. So you can let that dictate how much of this you make. What is the size of your platter? And you can really play with the different visual elements. You know, you can send them going outwards and you can make patterns. This is fun because this is really not cooking, this is more like assembling. So, you know, this is something if you have kids who like to get involved in the kitchen, this would be a really good thing to have them do because it's really not you know, if your child is too young to be cutting things up, that's okay. You can cut it first and then you can let them assemble. So that's one of the elements is the basil. So, I'm sorry, the tomatoes. And now we're going to do the basil. So to do basil, the best way to make it into nice thin ribbons, it's called the chiffonade technique. The best way to do that is you nest your leaves in each other. So you make leaf, leaf, leaf. And you can add as many as you want that way. You kind of, yeah, nesting is the best word I can think of. And so they have a natural curl. You can see that the leaves want to be a certain way. If you have big stems, you may want to pinch them off first. I just realized that. Should have pointed that out. So after you pinch off any kind of woodsy stems. So they naturally want to sit and curl. So you take advantage of that natural curl and you actually roll them into a tube. After you've rolled it into a tube, then you can just very thinly, and again, this is where you need a nice sharp knife to do this, very, very thinly slice them into ribbons. Chiffonade in French is ribbon. That's why this tech is called a chiffonade. Or this technique, sorry, is called a chiffonade because it means ribbons. And I will probably, before I garnish with this, I'm going to use this at the very end as a garnish. So I'm not going to put it on top of the tomatoes yet. I just wanted to show you. And then it's really neat because then you can kind of, it's almost like pasta strands. You can kind of ribbon it apart like that. So after you cut it, kind of ribbon it, you know, loosen it a little bit so that you'll be set it aside here for a moment. I kind of skipped to that part because I like that part the best and I was excited to do it. But I probably should have cut the cheese first, so we'll do that next. So the interesting thing about this type of mozzarella is that, as you can see, it's in brine, which is a little bit different than what you may see. Domestic sometimes is in brine, sometimes not, but the imported always is. This is one big hunk that you want to carefully, don't drop it. You drop it, it's going to splash you all over with salty brine. Don't do that. So once you have carefully removed it from the brine, then you are going to just cut it again thinly into rounds. And the imported varieties tend to be, especially the buffalo milk like this one, it tends to be a little bit more, it's less plasticky for lack of a better way to express it. You'll see that when you cut it, it's actually harder to cut through consistently because it's softer than the domestic varieties. So you do have to be a little bit more, you'll notice that I'm making a sawing motion. I'm not just trying to ram straight down on it, because if I just did that, I would just smush it. So you want to do that nice gentle sawing motion so that you can try to keep a slice, you know, you're trying to get a circular slice here as opposed to mashed up pieces of cheese. So you want to just, it gets harder as you get towards the end of it because it's harder to stand up on its own. Now once you have your nice roundish slices, you can kind of play with it and put it where you want to. You can overlap. This is where I'm not as perhaps garnish prone as a lot of other people are. A lot of people are very good at garnishing. I'm not quite one of those people. My mom's amazing at it. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to cut a little bit more tomato. But the good news is you can just play with this. And if you realize, oh, I think I want a different pattern, you can just change it, as I am doing right now, because I just realized maybe I should have put the cheese down first, but it's okay, because I can do this, and I can add more tomatoes to the top. And then you can even, if you wanted to kind of mince some of these tomatoes and sprinkle them on top. Again, this is very much up to your personal discretion and your designer eyes. So, just going to do a little bit of, actually, I'm going to put one right in the middle like that, piece of cheese. Yes, okay, this will work. So now I have cheese in the middle surrounding it, and then I'm going to put the little minced tomatoes in the center. Okay, now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and, I would say drizzle on, but drizzling is with a liquid, and this is clearly not. So I'm going to go ahead and strew on, like streusel, it's strewn, right? So I'm going to strew on the basil, and then all we have to do now is we're going to do a little bit of, I have rainbow peppercorns as pepper, a little bit of salt, except it would help if it were open. Just make sure you have it open on the shaking version and not the pouring version. You don't want to wreck your beautiful caprese. And then we are going to drizzle it. I got some balsamic vinegar, which is the preferred type that you would find in Italy. That's usually what they use. But if you, it's a little bit on the sweet side. You could also do with apple cider vinegar. But the balsamic, the sweetness is welcome because it goes well with the tomatoes and the creaminess of the cheese. And also it has that nice color. It's a little bit darker color. It's the, I think it's one of, there's black vinegar, which would be a bit darker, but balsamic is quite a dark vinegar, which is nice. It makes a contrast. And then for olive oil, I could literally talk about oil for an hour. I have actually written a book called The Big Book of Oils. It's my favorite subject. So I'm just going to very briefly say that a lot of extra virgin olive oil is not actually genuinely extra virgin olive oil. There's more information about this at the University of California, Davis. They have an olive center with a lot of information about this topic. Or you could look at my book, or you could look at Extra Virginity by Tom Mueller to learn more. But the short version is you have to be picky about what kind of olive oil you buy. And this one, actually, this is California Olive Ranch. It's domestically produced. This is actually one of the very few that when the University of California, Davis Olive Center tested supermarket oils to see are they actually extra virgin or not, this is one of the few that passed with flying colors. This is actually an extra virgin olive oil. So this is why I recommend this one. When people say, hey, what kind of olive oil should I get? You know what? There are other good options, but in terms of certified, verified by an expert authority, UC Davis Olive Center, this is a really good one. You can find it everywhere. It's in almost every store, and it's a reasonable price point. So that is my super short summary of which olive oil should I buy? This one. So we're going to use this to drizzle on top as well. And genuine olive oil has flavor to it. It is not a neutral oil. It should not be a neutral oil. And just as all olives are different, you know, there's red, there are green, there are black olives. Actually, there are some kind of red tinted olives. But anyway, they all have a different flavor, and olive oil likewise all has a different flavor. So from one to the next, you are going to taste differences in flavor, so choose what you like once you know you have a genuine olive oil. And that is it. That's all you have to do. So it's tomato, basil, good quality mozzarella, salt, pepper, balsamic vinegar, and good quality extra virgin olive oil. That's it. And then you just serve it at your next get together and everyone will be very happy. It's like pizza but without the crust. And for this dish, we are going to do, I called it salad in a jar, but it doesn't actually have to go into a jar. It's just if you would like to put it in a jar, it makes it very portable. So this is up to you. It can be salad in a bowl, on a plate, or in a jar. But the interesting thing about this salad is that we're not going to actually base it on typical lettuce. We are going to be using baby spinach. And by the way, baby spinach is, if I'm going to eat it raw, I prefer baby versus adult or curly spinach or classic because the adult versions of spinach are a little bit harder to digest for some people. They have a little bit more they have phytonutrients in them that can, for example, affect your absorption of calcium. So I prefer, if I'm going to eat greens raw, I prefer the baby version versus the adult version. So that's why I'm going to use baby spinach. But I do like using it raw in salads because it's more hearty. So compared to butter lettuce or mezclun, which is a mix of different types of lettuces, this is a little bit more sturdy. So it won't wilt as fast. And so I'm a big believer if you want to make a salad and if you want it to last a bit longer, you know, you want to make it in advance and put it in a jar, take it to work with you for your lunch, or make it ahead of time to serve to people later that evening. I do really like to use baby spinach as a base because it is going to be more sturdy. So we're going to have baby spinach, and then we're going to also use sweet onion. You can tell an onion typically by the shape is a sweet onion because it looks like you took a normal onion and did this and squished it. So whereas a normal onion is called a globe onion, it's more round, the sweet onion is what I call squished. So, or I guess you could call it convex. But that's how you can tell typically it's a sweet onion. And the difference between sweet onions and what are called storage or dry onions is sweet onions don't have as much of that onioniness to them. They're not as sulfuric. And it has to do with the type of soils that they're grown in. So they're a little bit more pleasant if you want to eat them raw. They're a little bit more pleasant. And in this case, we're putting them raw in a salad. But the downside of sweet onions compared to what are called storage onions, which are what you think of as an onion. Yellow onions, white onions, Spanish onions, those are all storage onions. This has a lot more moisture content, so it needs to be eaten fairly fresh. It does not store well for long amounts of time. Whereas storage onions, you can actually store for literally months in a root cellar. So each type of onion has its advantages, depending what you want to do with it and how long you want to keep it. But in this case, since we were putting it in a salad, I wanted to go ahead and use the sweet onion with the higher moisture content, a little bit more crisp, definitely less of a sulfur flavor, a little bit more gentle. I don't want it to absolutely stick out from the salad. I just want it to be a component of the salad. And by the way, the word salad just means something salted. So actually anything could be a salad if it has salt on it. But the term has come because sal means salt, S-A-L, in Latin and in Spanish, but it originated from Latin. But we now have come to think of a salad as, you know, a dish composed primarily of chilled vegetables with dressing on it. But I'm just saying it doesn't have to be. So we're going to put in some of these sweet onions that I minced to make them nice and small. Then I also have green beans that are already simmered. And so when you simmer green beans, basically you just want to remove the stem end. You just chop off that little stem end. And then some people like to steam them. I just like to actually simmer them for about 3 minutes. Sometimes I taste them to see how tender they are at that point, but I find that 3 minutes, between 3 and 5, if I taste them, they still seem a little bit tough, then I keep cooking for simmering for another moment or two. But I find that 3 to 5 minutes in simmering, just water, is perfect. You know, it's still a little bit of a crunch to it, but it's not too crunchy. You'll find that the fresher the green beans are, the less you need to cook them. If they're a little bit on the older side or if they're a little bit out of season, then you might have to cook them a little bit longer. But if you have just pulled them out of your garden, I guarantee 3 minutes is plenty for steaming or for simmering. And what you want to do too after that is, as soon as I simmer them for 3 minutes, I immediately put them in a colander, and I actually typically run cold water over them or even put them back into cold water, a bowl of cold water, because I want to stop them from cooking right away. Because otherwise, if you don't immediately chill whatever you've simmered, whether it's green beans or whether it's broccoli, it's going to keep cooking a little bit longer, and it might be a little bit too smushy, because if you like that al dente, you taste it out of the simmering water and it's perfect, and you want to keep it that way, then you have to shock it with cold water to make sure it stays that texture. So I also did broccoli I believe I did this for 5 minutes, but you can do 3 to 5 minutes, and you just want to put the florets in the salad. And that'll make a nice hearty salad. And then I got pastured eggs from pastured hens, which are also called free-range hens. There's different labels for this concept, but it basically means that the birds are outside eating what they should, which is bugs, because it's the early bird gets the worm, not the early bird gets the soybean. So the problem with eggs that are sold sometimes is you see vegetarian fed on the packaging. So then they can't be eating bugs if they're vegetarian fed. And since birds eat bugs, then they must not be outside. So when I look for eggs, I'm not looking for ones that say vegetarian fed. I'm looking for eggs that say pastured or free range or biodynamic, or in this case they do say free range, but there are different terms used to describe this concept. But I hard boiled the eggs for 10 minutes, and I'm happy to say they came out perfectly. No gray rim around them. So, and you'll also notice that with these higher quality eggs from really healthy hens, they're going to be more yellowish orange on the yolk. That's because the beta carotene, that vitamin A that makes that red or the yellow orange color, comes from the fact that hens are also eating grass as they're eating bugs, because they're pecking in the grass. So that's why you have that different color. That's why you have that richer yolk. And that's another way that you can typically tell how the birds, lived. What did they eat? Were they inside all the time? Were they battery hens, or were they actually outside and foraging? So I would suggest definitely, and at this time of year, we have all these wonderful farmers markets. So you might not have your own backyard hens, but you can most likely go to the farmer's market and find some really good quality eggs. Just so pretty. I just love these. And if you can find duck eggs, those are another fun item to try. Duck eggs, the big difference between duck and chicken eggs is that the yolk in duck eggs, the proportion of the yolk to the whites in the duck egg, much higher. So they have a much bigger yolk. So if you're like me and if your favorite part of the egg is the yolk, because that's where all that really rich flavor is, then you would love duck eggs. So we have our broccoli, our spinach, our beans, our eggs. And then to add kind of a, we have these items are very savory, I would say, that we have so far. But then I'm going to add blueberries to give it a little bit of a, little sweet sour thing going on, or a sweet savory thing I should say going on. So that's going to be our contrasting element, in addition to the fact that it looks really, really pretty to add that color of blueberry there. And then I also have goat cheese that we're going to add. And you can use a lot of different types of cheeses if you'd like. You know, you can use, I mean, you could use something like a grated Parmesan would be nice, a goat cheese would be nice. You can use different items here, but I am personally a big fan of goat cheese. And I think it's something kind of different. You know, a soft goat cheese like this is nice to try once in a while. You can get types that have herbs already on them. You know, they're rolled in herbs. I just opted for plain. I would not get the honeyed goat cheese for this dish because I just feel like that's a little bit too sweet to my taste. Honeyed goat cheese I think is better in maybe a dessert setting if you're serving it with fruit, you know, and a cheese board for a dessert type of thing. That's a good time to use the goat cheese and honey. But for this I prefer just plain, or with herbs would be a nice choice. So that's going to be our goat cheese element. And now I'm going to show you how easy it is to make your own salad dressing, because a lot of people like to purchase their salad dressings, but it's so much easier to make your own. And if you make your own, you can use really good quality olive oil. So basically, making salad dressing is very simple. You're going to have an oil and vinegar or something acidic. So we're going to use our really nice California Olive Ranch, actually extra virgin olive oil. I mentioned in another segment for another recipe we talked about this and the fact that this has been certified by the University of California, Davis as being a genuine extra virgin olive oil. So we're going to use that. We're going to use some apple cider vinegar, but if you didn't want to use any kind of vinegar, you could also just as easily use lemon juice or lime juice or orange juice, anything acidic, or you can use a different type of vinegar if you would prefer. And then to make these two items stick together, to emulsify them, because you have an oil and a water, vinegar is basically a water, it'd be in that category. Oil and water don't like to play together, but what you can do is you can use an emulsifier such as Dijon mustard or any kind of mustard. So that's going to be our emulsifier. Egg yolks are also a really nice emulsifier, which is why you see egg yolks used in classical mayonnaise if you make it at home yourself, or aioli, which is a garlic-infused mayonnaise. So you could just, for your dressing, just stick with oil and vinegar or oil and a citrus. But if you want to make it fancy and make it smoother and more homogeneous, add your emulsifier. I like to use mustard. And then I'm also going to add some thyme, because I like to add a little bit of an herb. And then I'm also going to add a little bit of freshly ground pepper. And as you can see, I put this all in a jar, and then you shake it. And in addition to it being really easy to make it this way, there's also the fact that then you can just store it this way. So it's just all upsides to making your own dressing because it's this easy. You could also whisk it together in a separate bowl if you want with a whisk. You can do it that way. But I think there's a lot to be said for just doing it in a jar and shaking it. Also, you get a little workout. So now we have our dressing ready to go. And this would be nice with a lot of different settings, a lot of different salads. Chicken salad's really nice with that. So you can go ahead and kind of eyeball it. Or you can follow the recipe you have in your pack and you can make it more exact if you'd like. And I'm just going to go ahead and toss the salad with the dressing. And like I said, because this is a nice sturdy type of salad, you really don't, I mean, it will wilt eventually, but it won't wilt as fast as if you based it on green leaf lettuce or your typical types of, or romaine isn't fairly sturdy. That's also a fairly sturdy leaf, but baby spinach is even more sturdy than romaine, I would say. So you can make this ahead of time, even toss it with the dressing ahead of time. It'll be fine. It'll last at least a day, if not more, in the fridge. And I think it needs a little bit more dressing. So I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. It's kind of an eyeball thing. You know, everybody has a different level they prefer dressing. So, or if you were serving this to folks, you could just leave the dressing in the jar, serve it on the side, let everybody dress their own salad. You could always do that. And once you have this all tossed together, you can put it in a jar if you're going to take it with you. Or, I was a little bit messy on the edges here. But here's what you can do to fix that. You just run a piece of paper towel around the edge, and at least it's a little bit more neat. And you can add, you know, if you want more egg, if you want more cheese, if you want more blueberry, that's up to you. But that is our simple summer salad.